Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're actually going to look at MRU information, or most recently used, items that are captured in the system's registry for what users have used most recently. Let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do is load the registry Hives of all the users that are not logged into this machine. The reason why we want to do that is so we can capture their information as well. So any user profile that's not logged in, their registry Hive is actually disabled or offline. What we want to do is enable that in the registry so we can query information from those Hives as well, even though the users are logged off. So real quick, we're going to run a command called get bg loaded reg hives just to show what's captured right now and show what registry Hives are behind the scenes. So in this case, like other videos, I mentioned that by default, the data is returned as a hash table. What we want to do is return the data as an object because we're looking at it in real time for both the screen, and we want to see it in something that we can actually look at. So in this case, we're just going to do a get bg loaded reg hives, and we're going to do a return object as a parameter. You can see we have a list of items, and just to make sure that we have all the items, that we have a list of what we're looking at, I'm just going to do a select on each one of these, and we can see that we have a count of 6 objects. We have the default user. Now you see the username, we have a SID, the Hive information is here, the PS path is here, and then the registry prefix, right? So you can see that user from SID. So we have NT authority, local services, we have the networking services, we have a test lab administrator, we have HKey current users, which is the common key class, and then we have, again, another authority system. So, or not another, but the authority system. What we want to do is we want to see if any other users are on this machine, but not logged in, and load the registry Hives. So we're going to clear screen. Now we're going to invoke a load all profile Hives. Now, again, you can do that by looking at bg help and then looking at something like Hives, and you can see that invoke bg load all profile Hives is right here. So if we run this command, load all known user profile Hives, we can actually get this information. So we're going to run that command. We'll do a return object just to see any data that's outputted to the screen. We have 3 new profiles that were loaded: administrator, another user, and public. What we're going to do is run that same previous command, which was get all of our loaded registry Hives, and tell us the difference between this one and the last one so you can see if there's any different. Now you can see by default the list looks much bigger, right? Just verbose to the screen, you can clearly tell that there's a few more items listed. If we want to do the measure object again, so same command, using that measure object, we can do a count, and you can see 2 more profiles were loaded on top of the one that we already had. So 2 users have been added to the registry Hive, their Hives have been loaded, and now we can do a full scan on the MRU list and do a scan on all those profiles as well. So here we're going to do a clear screen, and again we can do the bg help and then look for MRU, and you can see the query is, or the command is, get bg MRU activity view, or without the bg it's just get MRU activity view, but we're going to use this command. And here we're going to do a return object as well to see all that data. The reason why we run it against this console being the host is we want to make sure that our commands are executing and working the way we want. With that said, once we know that we're gathering information and our query is going to give us the data that we want, we can then build an artifact and run those against our remote nodes. So here you can see we have a handful of test lab admins. We have a handful of files in here where they were captured in the registry. So again, I'm going to scroll up really fast just to see more users. So here we're still on the administrator. Here we have another user. their registry Hive. You could see GitHub, a scratch file, introduction, remote desktop manager. So you could see all of the items that somebody was using. You could see here is an artifact ID. So we could start capturing and putting together a list of files that somebody was actually executing, and then track that back to see if there's any rogue, malicious file type information that's in there that helps us find if somebody was running something they shouldn't have, or it just ran on their own. So that being said, we're going to clear screen on this, and now we know that our commands run. We want to unload that registry Hive from the system. Again, if you look, we still have a count of 8. We want to get back to a count of 6, which means unload those registry Hives that we first loaded, because there's no longer needed. Those users are not logged in, and we're not doing scans on them anymore. So very similar to the invoke load, we're going to do an invoke bg unload all profile Hives. And here we're going to do another return object to see what registry Hives are unloaded. The 2 that we spoke about previously were the 2 that weren't loaded. If we do a count again, we should see 6, and we do. So our numbers all match up. So we know our system is back to the way it was before we ran any of these scans. Now that we know our commands work, now what we want to do is inject that into the settings config, export that out as an artifact, and then process those against all of our machines. Let's do that now. So we're going to clear screen, and we're just going to take a look at our settings file. So we can see it's blank. If it's not blank, let's say there's some kind of data, you can actually just type in wipe, and it will erase all that information, and then you'll be back at the main settings screen with all the default attributes. So now we're going to actually add those commands to the commands list. So in this case, we're going to do commands add, and we're going to type in get. Actually, we're not going to type in get, where we don't need the get bg load profiles in first scan unless you're tracking before and after. What you want to see normally is if new profiles were loaded and you could track them afterwards. But either way, we're going to go and do the invoke bg load profile Hives. So we're going to add that command. We're going to add another command. So these work in a sequential order. And so here we're going to do a get bg loaded registry Hives. So it tells us all the user profiles that were loaded. We're going to add the next command, which is going to be now get our MRU information. And just as a reminder, you can see that I'm not doing a return object because I'm not doing it in the console. I don't need it to be in a verbose display. What I want it to do is use the default hash table. When all of that data is returned through the WinRM broker, it will be returned and converted into JSON and then tracked in the log directory. So that's the reason why I didn't do the return object parameters on these commands. And then what we want to do is we want to add a post command. So post commands run first, parallel commands, and I'll show that off real quick. Commands run first, parallel commands run second, and parallel commands will run all the commands. So if we put these in parallel, they will all run at the same time. And then post commands happen after all of the other commands are done. Meaning, again, sequential order, parallel. Once parallel is done, then sequential order again, and post commands process. So we're now going to put in our unload all profile Hives in the post commands. And this just makes it cleaner. You can put it right underneath the commands and they will execute in that order. But to be absolutely specific about what region or section you want to execute code in, it's best to put it in the appropriate space, and that's going to be post commands for us because we want to make sure that it is the last command that's ran and nothing else processes. So we're going to do that now. We're going to type in post commands, again, add, and this time we're going to do the invoke bg unload profile hives, and now we've added that. We can take a quick look and we can see settings. We have our commands, and then we have our post command. So our first command is load all the profile hives. Second is to tell us what hives are loaded. Third is to run the MRU scan to gather all of the most recently used information for those profiles. And then the last command is to unload all the registry hives that were loaded in the first command. So it returns those systems back to status quo, and it gives us our information scanning all user profiles, not just the ones that are currently loaded. Which, truthfully, that's what most other security tools do. They do not load those registry hives and then do a scan on those. They're only scanning real-time profiles, so anything that's loaded. So now that we have that, we're actually going to save this artifact. So we're going to do an artifact export, and we can call this one MRU query. So you can see that here we have our query information. So here's our YAML. We'll copy that out, and then we will exit BlueGenie. So now we're back at the CLI, the terminal. We're going to run bluegenie.exe /sys, and we're going to do a group scan. So we're going to call AD for specific group. It's going to call bgscan 001. We're going to look for a specific artifact that we're going to load, which is what we just created. And then we're actually going to use the command run. And now this will go ahead and query that Active Directory group for all the systems that we have already established to be in that group. We're going to load the artifact, the one that we just created, and we're going to run that against all of our remote machines. Let's get into it. So you can see BlueGenie loaded. We have it set to not be hidden, so it's in the foreground. We can see all the activity happening. All the computers have finished with their connection, and now they're processing all the data, and then we're going to start getting returns shortly. Okay, now that all of our jobs have finished, now we can actually review the data. So let's get into it. So while we're in that root directory, you can see that there is a transcript directory, and underneath that we have our latest log. So the secondary log, we know today's date. This is what we're going to scan. So we're going to open up that folder and then just do a review. So we can see that we have completed data, and you can see that a handful of jobs around 685, 686. This usually means that these computers are offline, and that is true. There are 4 computers in this dev lab that are online: the DC, a Windows 10 box, the 10 dev box, and the SP, Windows 7 SP1. So let's take a look at any of those. So real quick, we'll actually do a quick look in the domain controller. So I showed this before on how to open up a file. You can actually just do a cat on that file. So we can do that. We can convert from JSON. Sorry, we're not in PowerShell. Now we are. Okay, so now we can do a cat on that file. Then we can do a convert from JSON. And we talked about this before. This will show an object hash table information. What we want to do is make it so that it comes back to the screen in a much cleaner format, so we can convert back to JSON with a depth of 10. And then you're going to see a lot of data and all different types of information. Now, I'm going to show a different way to pull that as well. So we'll do a clear screen. And this time, we're just going to open up Notepad++. So here we'll do Notepad. Let's see, Notepad on that file. So add.json. Mine opens up Notepad++. I'll bring that into the foreground so we could see it. Now you can see the data would look just like it would normally when it's pulled in, and that's because it's a compressed JSON. Notepad++ has a specific plugin. So if you go to plugins, you can see JSON viewer and format JSON, and it reformats it into a structured list. Again, if you were importing this data into your SIM, Splunk, Elasticsearch, whatever you want, it would pull the data and you can then format it to how you want. This is just one way, or these are two different ways to review this data. So now we're going to scroll up to the top and you can see that we have our job information, our IP, our host name, what command we ran, the return of that command, and what the data is. So this is called MRUs, and then here we have a complete list of all the items that were executed underneath there. So you can see MMC, PowerShell ISE, temp files created, MMCs, more temp files with source paths. So this goes through temp domain on policies. So this was a group policy startup file. You can see a lot of things that were pulled out of here, and you can then build specific searches around that data and find if there was anything malicious that was floating around. All right, well, that's it for querying most recently used items in the registry for all user profiles. Thank you for joining me in this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one.